You wrote an article based on a speech you gave at the NatCon conference, which exploded the internet, I think it's fair to say, when super viral, caused a lot of debate and discussion. And it's basically, I mean, I'll let you say it in your own words, but it's kind of a little bit about how the fact that women now control or at least represent the majority of the employees at many institutions is one of the reasons that society has gone the way it has. Is that fair?
I think that's fair to say. Some people have reacted to the piece by, acting as if I'm saying women cause all the problems in the world. I'm definitely not saying that, but I am saying that feminization has caused one specific particular problem, and that is wokeness. Like a lot of people, I was baffled by the woke phenomenon. Why did everyone seemingly go crazy all at once in the summer of 2020? It was inexplicable. It seemed to be mass hysteria, genuinely. And the more I thought about what caused it, which is a very important question, because if we know what causes it, we know how to prevent it from happening in the future. I read an article that someone else wrote that put forward a really simple, elegant thesis, which is that wokeness is simply feminine patterns of behavior applied to institutions where women had not been very well represented until recently. Women tend to be more consensus-focused, consensus-oriented. Men, when they're approaching a moral question, will ask, what are the facts? What are the rules? Whereas women will say, what are the relationships at play here? How can we make everybody happy? Mm-hmm. How can we reach an outcome that will satisfy all the parties? As opposed to the male perspective of how do we reach an outcome that is just and according to the rules. That sounded a lot like wokeness to me. And the sort of piece that made it all click into place for me was the coincidence of timing. It is the case, just we can all agree as a matter of fact, that a lot of institutions that went woke or were affected by wokeness became demographically female in the last 5 years. Law schools in America turned majority female in 2016, and they've gotten a little bit more female every year since then. I think now it stands at 55, 56%. The New York Times became majority female in its workforce in 2018, which is maybe why it was so susceptible to the fads of wokeness and the internal policing and the Slack revolts that took place internally over there. Medical schools are now majority female. The white-collar workforce overall, employees in the United States with college degrees, a majority of them are women. And managers, management positions in the U.S. workforce, 46% female, so almost majority female. So the fact that all of these institutions tipped over to being majority female around the same time that wokeness emerged seemed to me that couldn't possibly be a coincidence.
And there's so many questions within that. I guess the first stress test of this argument would be, well, they were also very close to being majority female 10 years prior to that, right? So does going from 48 to 52%, is that really such a major shift that it would cause something as dramatic as that?
Well, you'd be surprised. I thought that the higher education workforce, professors in the United States, would have gone female ages and ages ago. But it actually only tipped female in 2023. So we think of feminization as something that happened a long time ago, but it really does take a certain amount of time for time to pass and older generations to retire. But I think the reason why attaining a critical mass of women has such a dramatic effect is that we're not talking about individual differences between individual men and individual women, but differences in group dynamics. For example, you might be able to say from the perspective of psychology as a discipline that women tend to be more emotional than men and men tend to be more rational, or any kind of generalization about men and women might have a certain amount of empirical support based on surveys. But at the end of the day, those differences are not massive, right? Like female support for free speech is greater or is less than male by double digits, but not, it's not like night and day. But when it comes to group dynamics, how does an organization function? How does an institution deal with conflict? When you're talking about those kinds of things, those tend to be more binary. Like either you solve your conflicts within an organization in a masculine way or in a feminine way. Either open conflict is something that your institution will tolerate or it's not. So that's the kind of thing where once you get a critical mass, you really kind of have to pick which one you're going to do.
Well, you mentioned consensus and sort of empathy and including all perspectives. That really isn't what happened with wokeness, though, is it? Because it was more like, we've come to a new consensus and anyone who doesn't agree is going to get killed, basically. Is that really, I mean, that might be the way women deal with this on a group basis. I don't know. You tell me.
No, it's hard to verbalize some of these differences because it might be a convenient shorthand to say men are more comfortable with conflict than women. And I think that makes a lot of sense, right? But a famous psychology study, very often if you're studying gender differences, and you're a psychologist, the way you'll do your study is you'll just go to a playground and watch the kids playing and observe and count up how many times somebody hits somebody else or something like that. And there was an experiment of that type done, I believe, in Scandinavia, and it had a really funny outcome. The psychologists observed the kids playing and counted up how many fights they had. And they said, okay, we observe that the men fight a lot more than the girls. But then as a supplement, they decided to confirm their observations by talking to the kids and saying, how many fights did you have today, Billy? Or how many fights did you have today, Sally? And their discrepancy was huge. They found that the girls reported having just as many fights as the men. The level of conflict, male and female, on that schoolyard was exactly the same. But their observations had failed to record any of the female conflicts because when they asked the girls, oh, you had a fight today, what did that entail? It was things like Megan said she was going to tell everybody they couldn't be my friend anymore.
Which is where words of violence comes from, would be, I imagine, your argument.
That's right. That's right. And one of the most consistent psychological differences between men and women is women have a strong impulse of caring, right? Which is exactly, I'm not somebody who looks to evolutionary biology for the solutions to all human phenomena, but this particular one does seem glaringly Darwinian, right? That women see helpless things and they want to take care of them. That is definitely something that Darwin would find a pretty easy explanation for. But that's also something that wokeness can easily weaponize. It means that if you can frame your political issue as a way of caring for some helpless class, then you're golden, right?
Minorities are babies.
That's right. But that is precisely what's going on at a deeper level. And that's why it's been so effective.
And Helen, your article, and I encourage everyone to read it, it's fascinating whether you agree or disagree with it, but you cited one particular case, which is the former president of Harvard. So let's talk about that because you use it as the main example for the thrust of your argument.
That's right. This was back in 2005. So this is before anybody had ever heard of wokeness. Now, I don't know if your listeners in the UK will be familiar with Larry Summers, but he was at that time probably one of the 10 most powerful people in the country. He was not just the president of Harvard. He had also been in Bill Clinton's cabinet. He had been at the World Bank. He was an academically eminent economist, very well connected in the Democratic Party, just a really powerful guy. He was invited to give a speech at a conference on female underrepresentation in science and math, and he decided to deliver his remarks off the cuff. And to be really, and actually, if you know anything about Larry Summers, he has a reputation for being a really blunt guy. He's somebody who does not suffer fools gladly. So when you're getting the blunt Larry Summers, you're really getting something quite direct. But the talk was supposed to be off the record. And that's important to emphasize that the women who listened to what he said and took it to a reporter were violating the rules that they had undertaken to follow when they attended. Anyway, he said that female underrepresentation in the hard sciences was attributable to a lot of different factors, not necessarily just prejudice or bias or the patriarchy not thinking ladies can be scientists. There is a difference of aptitude at the very, very, very high ends. If you're talking about people who are going to be tenured at MIT, that's the way out at the end of the bell curve, and there tend to be more men out there than women. And also differences in taste. That is, women tend to gravitate towards professions and fields where they get to deal with people as opposed to something really cold and abstract like physics. Not to say that no women do, but that is the tendency. So women who are way out there at that end of the bell curve and have the aptitude for a career in hard science would maybe gravitate to something like medicine as opposed to something like physics. So Larry Summers said all this, and there were a bunch of lady scientists in the audience who said, "How dare you?" And they gave quotes to a reporter, something like, "I felt like I was going to throw up," or I thought I was going to black out. And it became a huge controversy. And there were a lot of other controversies during Larry Summers' tenure as president of Harvard. So that was not the only thing that brought him down, but it was definitely at the very top of the list. And about a year later, he resigned.
And what's really interesting is with that case, and now I don't doubt that it caused a massive stir when he went on and basically went, I'm going to freestyle and deliver truth bombs to all of you. So here we are, enjoy it. But he's also, if you get to be president of Harvard, you are going to make enemies aplenty. In order to get to that position, you're going to have to fire people, antagonize people, because that's just the nature of the job. So he would have had loads of enemies who were willing just to pounce at that particular moment, surely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm trying to remember some of the other controversies that have attended Larry Summers' career, and I believe one from his tenure at the World Bank was when he said, are we sure we want to really, really enforce labor laws against having sweatshops in third world countries? Because isn't having sweatshops good for them sometimes? I mean, it leads to economic development. He phrased it in a really blunt way. Mm-hmm. So like, this is a guy who has a history of putting his foot in his mouth in a way that I frankly find really admirable.
Yeah. But certain people don't. So then has that been extrapolated right the way through society, essentially, is your argument?
That was one of the first times that a cancellation happened, that people heard somebody say something offensive, pitched a little fit, and managed to rob this person of his job. And the particular aspect of it that seemed so full of foreboding looking back is that there was no attempt to debate the issue rationally. There were plenty of people, even people on the Harvard faculty, with eminent expertise in the relevant scientific fields, willing to stand up and say everything Larry Summers said was perfectly within the scientific mainstream. Greater male variability hypothesis, that's, everybody thinks that. So there were people willing to say he's right on the facts. Criticize him all you want for his tone, but he was right on the facts. And the women who went after his job were not willing to have that debate. They were not willing to talk about it rationally. They just said, I'm offended. I felt like I was going to black out. He was invalidating my career. This is everything I worked for. Very much a feelings over facts kind of thing. And so I don't mind if there are people who are feminists or who have different political views to those that I have, but it's important that we be able to debate them, right? That we have rational arguments. And this was one of the first instances where people just said, no, I'm not gonna debate it. I'm just gonna say I'm offended. And that's gonna be the end of the story. Because
Jordan Peterson used to talk a lot about this, where he used to talk about one of the ways that females try and destroy or attack other people isn't through the physical realm, it's through reputation destruction. And this is essentially what you're talking about, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.